get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, all right? And we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down, all right? And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap, and we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down.
And welcome in. I hope you had a fantastic weekend, and let us here at Kneecaps for Breakfast be the very first to wish you a very good week ahead. And what better way to start your week than by hanging out with me, Vince Progar, and that guy over there, Phil Byrne. What's up, buddy?
Hey, I am that guy over here, I guess. Doing well, Vince. Again, another no football weekend. But trying to make the best of it. I was able to actually kind of go out near your neck of the woods a little bit.
Really?
We're in Novi on Saturday for the Michigan Golf Show.
Okay.
So that was kind of fun to kind of see discounted golf clubs and a whole bunch of ways to spend money. I did not spend anything.
And dozens of guys coming at you trying to sell you something.
Yeah. But we have a family friend that is an author out there, and she had a booth set up for children's golf books and stuff like that. So that was really cool to see, and
all right,
and great kind of thing to pass a little bit of Saturday by.
And also the fact that spring is ever on its way. Things like going to golf shows or outdoor home and gardening shows kind of puts that in your mind that, hey, nicer days are ahead of us.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think the days are a little bit longer here. Obviously, we went forward with the clocks today, which didn't catch me too off guard. I still have a couple things that are like those manual setups instead of automatically rolling over. So kind of had to like check your phone a couple times. Wait, no, hold on. Was this? Nope, this one didn't roll over. So always a fun day to do that. I'm sure I'll feel it at some point tomorrow though during work.
Absolutely. It'll be I usually leave work at 7:00 Eastern time on Mondays, and I'm going to be looking at my watch thinking to myself, wait a minute, it feels like 8:00 right about now. What am I still doing here? We go through that twice a year, and it is what it is, and we can talk about that ad nauseum. But like you said, Phil, no football to speak of yet again, but we did have some football activity, maybe not games on the field, but some activity with the start of the free agency period in the National Football League. We're going to touch on that later in the episode, as there are some things that maybe affect some of our NFC teams who the Lions will be playing against next season, and maybe some implications for the Lions organization as well based on some of those moves. So those are all things that we're going to touch on. We're going to kick off the way that we have the last few weeks and continuing to recap the Lions 2023 schedule en route to their NFC North championship banner that they got to hang at Ford Field. So that is where we are going to get things rolling. And we left off in the Windy City. Lions playing the Bears for the second time during the season and coming off the game where they were lucky to escape New Orleans after dropping one to the Packers the week before that. That was a game that the Lions kind of wanted to come in and get a win, and that just isn't how it worked out. It was probably the worst game of the season for Jared Goff from both a statistical and a practical standpoint. Really couldn't get anything going through the air. None of the Lions receivers really had any day that was worth discussing. It's not like the offense for the Bears was a juggernaut by any stretch of the imagination. The Bears kind of controlled things in the first quarter. The Lions actually had a pretty decent second quarter. You go into the locker room tied at halftime, and then it was all Bears in the second half. The biggest story in that one was 2 turnovers by the Lions, and they were 1 out of 5 from on fourth down. And what that did was that allowed the Bears and Justin Fields to have short fields to work with on more occasions than not. And it was just too much in the way of Chicago, maybe a little bit too much Justin Fields on that day for the Bears to win by 13 points. Phil, your thoughts?
Yeah. So classic game where really bad third quarter. For whatever reason, couldn't really put a thumb on it why the Lions struggled so much in the third quarter.
That's the way it's been the whole season.
Yeah. But this was maybe one of the worst, just a whole bunch of punts and a fumble. Turnover on downs, kind of getting in their first possession of the fourth quarter. It wasn't a blowout by any means, but I think the second half was kind of one of those second halves where really nothing went the way that the Lions wanted. Very difficult to kind of get that one going. So, yeah, no, it was just kind of a continuation, but instead of eking out the win like they did, against the Chargers on the road, against the Bears at home, a couple other games where they were kind of fortunate to get some good possession, some good drives going in the fourth quarter to counteract what happened in the third. It just didn't happen. It just didn't happen in Chicago, and we had to take the L on this one.
It almost seemed to me at the time that the Lions abandoned the running game a little bit too soon and started maybe playing a little bit more tentative, maybe trying to force things in the passing game, even though nothing was really going. And let's also not forget that this was really the first time all season that the Lions were forced to play out in the elements. Being a dome team, those dome teams tend to struggle a little bit when the temperature gets a little bit too cold, the wind becomes a little bit too much of a factor. They got lucky over the course of the season that they got to go to Green Bay early in the year. They went to Baltimore early in the year, and they really weren't due for any outdoor games the rest of the way. This was the exception, though.
It was. And, sometimes you would like to, have a cold game in early to mid October just to kind of like prep for any outdoor games that you might have during the stretch run. But that really wasn't the case here. Of course, when we went to Lambeau, it was earlier in the season and it was a night game. So you weren't going to get any, terrible weather during that one. So, yeah, again, this really was that first, poor weather game, which, in some theory, I guess getting that under your skin for it, you can kind of get used to if there would be an outdoor game, that was come playoff season or whatever. But that wasn't meant to be either. But yeah, just this is one that Lions I think just needed to kind of put in the rear view mirror and move on from. And again, it was we'll see what happens with Justin Fields here, but kind of a really positive sign if you're a Bears fan of what they were capable of doing. After their defense really started to play much better towards the stretch run.
So the NFL flex scheduling then takes effect. The NFL was able to then flex the Lions game, which had not been actually penciled in for a time slot that was kind of left on a TBD basis back when the original schedule was written. This is the Lions game against the Broncos the following week at Ford Field, and they wound up making that a Saturday night game at Ford Field. So that was great for Lions fans. They got to have an opportunity to show out on a national stage and see if they could get off a schneid against the Broncos, who got off to a horrendous start and all of a sudden, slowly but surely, started to look like they were figuring some things out. And they came into that one with a 6-7 record. Lions at 9-4 heading in, and that was a pretty slow start for both teams. The Broncos were able to string a nice run together to start the game. They weren't able to capitalize that with any points. It was actually a scoreless first quarter, but after that, it was all Lions. The Lions won that one going away. I don't think in my mind that game was nearly as close as what the score indicated. 5 touchdown passes by Jared Goff, over 100 yards rushing, and a touchdown by Jahmyr Gibbs. Another big day by St. Brown, and the Lions defense, in my mind, Phil, kind of set the stage for what we would see the rest of the way in that, okay, the Lions' front seven isn't really generating the type of pressure on the quarterback needed to be disruptive. I think this is the game where Aaron Glenn kind of went back to the drawing board and said, okay, we need to get everybody involved in generating that pass rush, including the 5 guys in the secondary. And I think this is the first time we really started to see some of the fruits of that change, and they made Russell Wilson and that offense look uncomfortable the entire night.
He really was uncomfortable, without a doubt. I think this was Sean Payton yelling at Russell Wilson on the sideline. You could see that all was not well there. And this is off the heels, I think it was the week before or the week prior, where the Broncos beat the Chiefs. So they were feeling some momentum coming into this one. Lions took it away, though, beginning in the second quarter. A couple of really nice drives. Sam Laporta getting things going in the passing game. Another strong outing from him. This was such a good feeling watching this at home, putting that Chicago game behind you, knowing that, you're not allowing a team to come in, ride a little bit of momentum and take what on paper should have been a win. an easy win for the Lions. Lions came in, took care of business. You know, this is a come to game in a suit and tie and take care of business kind of game. That's what they did. 42-17, and quite frankly, you know, in a lot of aspects, if it wasn't for a slower first quarter, I could have seen the Lions putting even more points up on the board. They really showed out beginning of the second quarter.
This was the one game during the season where I wasn't really able to pay a whole lot of attention to in the moment. Shout out to my fantastic neighbors. We had our annual Christmas get together where we kind of hopped around between each of our houses, and the Lions game was on at each of those destinations, but I wasn't able to pay super close attention. But what I was able to see was it was a lot of fun. And that's something that we weren't able to really tap into a whole lot over this run over the last couple of years. Is it seems like we've got to grind a lot of these out, kind of sweat them out a little bit. This one, you were just able to kick back and enjoy and watch a team that looked like they belonged out there playing really good in that primetime slot.
Hey, this is a Brad Holmes game, right? So this is one where Jahmyr Gibbs went 11 for 100 for 1 touchdown. Sam Laporta, 3 touchdowns on the game. Have a day, big fella. This is just some great stats to go along. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 7 receptions, 112 yards with 1 touchdown as well. So Lions bring it in the stat sheet as well. Jared Goff, 5 touchdowns. How about that coming out of the really porous game on the road in Chicago? All was well. The ship was righted. The sails were set, and the Lions were way back to where they were pre-Chicago, and maybe even before the other Chicago game at home, where it seemed like they were once again a contender.
And I mentioned the change in the defensive approach. And one guy who really, in my mind, took advantage of this is a guy who really was a playmaker for this team from this point to where their season ended. And that was Ife Melifonwu. Again, a Brad Holmes guy. And did he ever come out in a big way? 6 solo tackles, 9 overall, 1 sack, 1 tackle for loss, 2 passes broken up, and 2 hits on the quarterback. This is a safety taken in the 3rd round a couple of years back who really, I'm sure if he delivered a pizza to your door, you probably wouldn't even know who he was. But what a game he had. And again, I think he really took that and carried it forward the whole rest of the run for the Lions.
Yeah, you bet. And talk about like waiting on the fruits of your labor, right? So this pick happens. There's no instant results. This isn't just to simply add water, get high caliber secondary player. This took time. This took an opportunity to develop with some injuries in the secondary, and all of a sudden Ife Melifonwu came on the stage, delivered, and really made an absolute impact in this game. Getting to Russell Wilson looks to be a big part of how we put this defense together moving forward.
So that takes us to Christmas Eve the following week at the Minnesota Vikings. A win against Minnesota would give the Lions officially their first division title since the early to mid 90s. So we're talking about a 30-year time span with no division titles. The Lions had a chance on Christmas Eve to give Lions fans the best Christmas gift of all. And it was a pretty back and forth game against Minnesota the whole time. They were able to force, at the time, backup quarterback Nick Mullins into 4 interceptions, but it just seemed like if he needed to complete a pass, the chances were pretty high of that happening. Over 400 yards. What a huge game through the air by Minnesota. And it just seemed like the Lions defense was able to kind of on the flip side from the previous week, show some of that vulnerability through being able to defend just about anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. The Vikings and the way that their offense was presented reminded me so much of kind of some of those Stafford years that we would have, where there was no run game whatsoever. You knew there would be 50 pass attempts, and with Nick Mullins, I mean, 411 yards, 2 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. The 4 interceptions are key. It's what ended the game. It's what sealed the division, the first division title for the Lions in forever. But just looking at the stat sheet here, Ty Chandler, 8 carries, 17 yards. That's not getting it done. That's not like what they used to have with Dalvin Cook a couple years back. So I think when we talk about division hierarchy rankings and it's kind of like where these teams are, the fact that the Vikings have shown an absolute inability to run the football, defense at times has looked very spotty. And at best, you can say, well, they got a couple of really nice receivers. Okay, I mean that's one aspect of the game that they're good. They've got some good receivers. But as we'll get into later in the episode with Kirk Cousins, who knows what their quarterback situation is going to be like. So really the way I'm approaching the Vikings moving forward is they got a couple of nice receivers. I don't really know what else they got right now.
I want to pivot for just a second here before we go any further, because you brought up a real good point, Phil. What do you make of the Vikings? Not necessarily their ability or inability, rather, but basically their lack of willingness to really address that run game. I get why you don't want to pay a guy in Dalvin Cook who's had injuries, who's starting to maybe wear down some of that tread. But why didn't they make more of an effort to get a difference maker in there, whether it's a guy you got to pay a lot of money to or a guy that you use through the draft? It just didn't seem like Alexander Madison and Ty Chandler was really going to be a recipe for success. And I think that was in a large way their downfall, not just in this game, but over the course of the season, because again, they just had no other alternative if it wasn't working through the air, which it did from a yardage standpoint, from a stats accumulation standpoint. But when they needed to really string drives together and maybe really wear down that Lions defense on a different level, they just never had that threat whatsoever.
Yeah, they didn't have that threat. And part of me thinks that, Alexander Madison had been pretty solid in mop up duty over the course of the last couple of years, just kind of giving Dalvin Cook a spell when he was kind of, getting tired or, when he was hurt or out for a couple games or something like that. And I think they just assumed that he would be able to kind of carry the load. Okay, well, maybe we won't get as many yards. We won't have the high impact that Dalvin Cook had, but like it won't be this drastic fall off. Well, it was a drastic fall off. And, I know with the way that team is presented, they do want to pass the ball. They want to be a heavy passing attack. But at some point, you got to run the ball to keep a defense honest and balanced. And if you don't respect the run, you can only throw so many passes up to Justin Jefferson. So at some point, something's got to give with how they address that. And, hey, we're not a Vikings podcast, so if they want to, completely abandon the run and just try to pass 50 times a game, yeah, I mean, we'll I don't want to say take 2 wins a year, but I'd like the way the Lions have constructed their roster as opposed to the Vikings.
So the Vikings had the ball with a chance to, at the minimum, tie with missing an extra point or take the lead with a successful extra point. And Nick Mullins chose that opportunity to throw his 4th interception of the game. And it was our guy that we had talked about earlier in the game, Melifonwu, the guy who made that interception and was able to bring it home for the Lions, getting them their first division title in 30 years.
Yeah. And it was a really kind of a duck of a pass. Like it just kind of died midair, right? And was one of those ones that was just super easy to read by Melifonwu, and he just kind of stepped right under it. And it's just kind of, I don't want to say fitting, but like it wasn't a guy who a couple of weeks ago you thought would have been the player to make the play of the game to seal it, right? You're thinking, okay, maybe it'll be Hutch, maybe it'll be Anzalone. One of these guys that's been a huge contributor for the defense, these last 3 seasons. No, it was Melifonwu, right? The guy that people didn't really know what they had. Okay, they're thinking, okay, maybe he's depth in the secondary. Maybe he's a gunner on special teams. No, he's playing sizable contributions on defense. He's making that play to help seal the NFC North. And it really shows you that over time, how good of a job Brad Holmes did really, picking some of these guys out. And maybe if they were hurt or they couldn't find the time, that they were still going to contribute at some point, over the course of their first couple seasons.
So the Lions win the game. They win the division. This happens on Christmas Eve. Tell me what Christmas Eve night for Phil Byrne was.
I'm like, as soon as the game ends, I was watching at my parents' place, getting ready for Christmas Day, of course. And I'm like, come on, just pull up the Lions YouTube channel. I got to see this post game celebration. Like this is quite honestly all I really wanted for Christmas. I just wanted to get this done as a season ticket holder. It meant you had a home playoff game. It was something that like I just couldn't even fathom, right? Ford Field getting its first ever playoff game. It sealed the deal. What an amazing Christmas gift for everyone out there. Just a gift to buy into something that was built unconventionally with having all these former players as coaches. Obviously, Dan Campbell being at front and center of just really the rebrand and the reimagining of what a football coach can be, in 2024. And man, they got it together, and it was such a surreal moment watching it. I was just like, man, they actually did it. They actually did it. Month later, we're winning a playoff game, and it's an even sweeter feeling.
And that feeling didn't really hit for me in the moment because with it being Christmas Eve, we're hopping back and forth between one house and another, and things kind of got lost in the shuffle. Then at the end of the night, my wife and I were kind of doing our own little Christmas Eve night traditions before we headed off to bed. And as I'm sitting there on my phone, we've called it out over the course of our run during this podcast with the Lions just do a phenomenal job with their YouTube presence and their social media presence, really making the fans feel like they're a part of what's going on. They really do a fantastic job. And that day was no different, posting the locker room speech, the game highlights, the Dan Miller highlights. And it was in that moment, probably about 6 hours, 7 hours after the dust settled, looking at this stuff over on the YouTube channel, and that's where it hit me. The waterworks were definitely in full effect at that point, and that was the we finally did it moment. And it was like nothing I'd ever experienced before because I really wasn't old enough to make sense of it the last time it happened.
And how cool was the moment? Where Dan Campbell's like, all right, let's get the old guard up here.
Yep.
And the linemen that Taylor Decker and Frank Ragnow and Jalen Reeves-Maven and these guys that were holdovers from the Quinn Trisha years, where I'm sure going to work, even though you're a pro football player, was just an absolute chore. Man, what a Christmas gift to get to win that division, to get honored amongst your peers like that. What an awesome, awesome, awesome locker room scene that was.
So cool. So now you're fighting for positioning in the playoffs. You know it's a done deal. You know that the NFL playoffs are coming back to Detroit. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. So now seeding is of the major concern moving forward. Final regular season road game on the horizon against the Dallas Cowboys in North Texas.
Oh boy.
It's a Saturday night, but it's still the Monday Night Football broadcast. Joe Buck and Troy Aikman and the dun 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 production. It's all looking pretty good at this point. And what a game that was. Got two teams going blow for blow, essentially. Neither one team looked like they were inferior to the other. Both teams looked like they belonged. If you had no dog in the fight whatsoever, you were just sitting back enjoying the whole thing, thinking, what a better way to spend a Saturday night. Dak Prescott had basically dominated at home all season long. The Lions did enough on defense to make him look pedestrian. They allowed CeeDee Lamb to run completely roughshod for about a quarter of 1,000 yards on the night, similar to what they did Justin Jefferson the week prior to that. But by and large, they were able to hold the Cowboys in check, and the Lions with the chance to win the game at the very end. I'm not going to rehash the 2-point conversion play because we've all seen it over and over and over and over in the days following that. But what a heartbreaking way to lose a game, Phil, on a play like that. I've always said from the very beginning, I would rather go out there and play a game like we did against the Baltimore Ravens, where you go out there and get kicked in the teeth from the word go, 38-6, than go through something like that. I remember it being probably, what was it, about 11:15, 11:30 at night here on a Saturday night. My wife and I and the dog are watching the game, and we're all decked out head to toe in our Lions blue colors. And imagine 6'5" me jumping up and down in a living room, screaming and shouting. We had just pulled off the big win on the road against the Cowboys, and a number 1 overall seed was definitely on the table at that point. only for it to go a complete 180.
So this was the one game during the regular season that I actually watched at a sports bar. So, not to get into the whole story behind it, but I was meeting up with my brother. He lives out in Royal Oak, and we were trying to find a sports bar kind of last second along the Woodward corridor there that had a table, had a spot, had anything. Didn't find anything. Came up back to my way up near Rochester. We ended up finding a place. We're in there. We're watching the game, and it was electric. I mean, this is a game that you wanted to watch in person. The highs, the lows, the in betweens. Vince, I say this, I've been to so many of these Lions games, but there are games that feel different to watch and a little bit more of like an intimate kind of sports bar setting where people are cheering and celebrating during things, and you can see people's reactions, and you got 100 people at a bar or whatever. This game was such a 180 of emotions between thinking that we had won the game, the bar absolutely just going nuts. I can't even really put it into words. And then the deafening silence 2 minutes later, and just walking out of the bar after you're cashed out and just sitting in the car for like 2 minutes and just trying to sit in your mind what we just saw, what we just witnessed. And then half hour passes, still very, very upset about what happens. But then I woke up the next day, kind of thought about it, and you're like, you know what? The Lions, they won that game. They're not going to get it record wise, but they won that game. They won in Dallas. The way that they should have won that game in Dallas. That's something we've never seen before. Getting a win down the stretch at a, playoff caliber, they were a playoff team, is something that I have never seen as a Lions fan. And yes, it still goes in, the record books as a loss. It was a loss, but we saw the Lions essentially win the game and have that taken away. It's something that I knew there were still special elements for this team to be had out there. And were they going to just be able to use this game as the motivational fuel to get to where they wanted to get to?
And you had seen it through history. It's no secret that the Lions did a lot over the course of that regular season, exercise a lot of those demons, particularly by winning the division, being guaranteed a home playoff game. But you saw things like the Calvin Johnson process, where that was a game the Lions should have won, didn't. The Thursday night Green Bay Packers pass back and forth kind of thing, should have won that game, didn't. Now you got the 2-point conversion, should have won that game, didn't. Nothing to do with what the Lions did, strictly a administrative error by the officiating crew. The difference, though, is over the course of the last couple of seasons, the Lions were able to build up so much positive equity among not just Lions fans, not just Michiganders or Detroiters, but you're talking football fans nationwide. The entire nation was watching that game because there was nothing else to do on a Saturday night that time of year. They did a really nice job of having two big New Year's Six bowl games air on ESPN early in the day, which led right into the National Football League game of the week for ESPN. And I think that outraged so many football fans that it really got a lot of people to basically pick the Lions as their pet team the rest of the way.
Yeah, without a doubt. And, we'll have to see because, what's the quote from The Dark Knight from Harvey Dent? Eventually, become the villain, right? Which, hey, Brad Holmes is always already kind of embraced the villain persona with that sweatshirt and whatnot. But yeah, without a doubt, I think the Lions became that team that people wanted to see succeed following this one, knowing that everyone had just basically watched them get screwed over the end result of this one. So yeah, it's a game that just vividly going to remember for a very, very long time. But again, we had already, won, and it was just kind of a case of, okay, are we going to be able to take care of business against the Vikings, and where is the seeding going to be? And the Rams are picking up a lot of momentum. Are we going to see Stafford in the playoffs? Interesting.
So that leads us to our final game of the season against Minnesota at Ford Field. Kind of quirky the way the NFL did the scheduling, playing the Lions and Vikings twice in the final 3 weeks of the season. Obviously, I'm assuming they thought Minnesota was going to bring a little bit more in the way of sex appeal to those matchups, particularly down the stretch. It didn't quite work out that way, but that's what was on the table for the Lions. Based on what happened in the other games, the Lions needed a lot to go their way in order to get the seeding that they really wanted. They needed to win the game against Minnesota. They needed the Giants to beat the Eagles, and they needed the Commanders to beat the Cowboys. You could argue that 1 out of 3, sure. 2 out of 3, maybe. 3 out of 3, probably a bridge too far. And that's how it worked out. And the game itself wasn't super memorable. The Lions jumped out to a lead and were able to kind of hold their own over the course of the game. The key was, let's just get through this game. Let's pick up this win. Let's have everybody have a good time out there at Ford Field. And most importantly, do not get anybody hurt. And do you think that happened, Phil? Sam Laporta basically has his knee explode in the second quarter. I started throwing out words that I probably have never used in my life. Khalif Raymond, the kickoff and punt returner, getting himself hurt. I'm sure a couple other guys got hurt that I can't remember, but those are the two that stick with me that brought up to light the age-old discussion. What do you do with your starters and your key players in a game that basically by good percentages means next to nothing?
And it was chilling when Sam Laporta got hurt, right? Because Khalif Raymond, depth guy, special teamer, he's a weapon still, right? He's not Sam Laporta. I mean, that is a high impact player, a player that was an X factor on this team. The previous game it was the Broncos game, right? 3 touchdowns. That's what he's capable of. And to think that, oh no, we're not going to get him. I still am not entirely sure how he did anything with that brace that we eventually saw, but yeah, Sam Laporta's injury was really the most memorable thing about this game, and just the fact that the Lions were able to eke out the win.
And that basically takes us to right where we started our adventure, right after the Minnesota game and right when the Lions are about to take on the Rams. So now we've officially come full circle. We've had our take on every game that the Lions have played this year, right into the start of the playoffs. But I'll agree with you there, Phil. That was enough to really make me sick to my stomach watching that Laporta injury. I watched it over and over again. I probably hit the refresh button on my phone probably every 5-10 minutes, it seemed like, for those first few days, just waiting for some type of update from the Lions or Dan Campbell or even Laporta himself as to what his status was going to be for that playoff game. And there really were no definitive answers until maybe by midweek. But even then, it was like, okay, let's see how he's doing Wednesday. Let's see how he's doing Friday. Okay, we'll put him as questionable. We'll see what he does. And that was enough to make Lions fans get some gray hair there.
Well, it's really just what a strength that we have kind of turned this corner and sort of, rehabbing these injuries, right? Where something that 10, 15 years ago was probably a 6-week, 10-week injury with proper stretching, cooling, maybe some yoga thrown in there, massage for sure. You're able to play with a brace, right? So it's insane to see that he really didn't miss any time other than just a portion of the Vikings game.
Now, real quick, Phil, before we move on, I did have one other thought thinking back to the Laporta injury. And it seems like, obviously, with Sam only maybe taking 3-4 days of basically being a scratch at practice and being able to play with that gigantic brace in probably the biggest playoff games in the history of the Detroit Lions franchise, at least the modern history of the Lions franchise. And you factor that in with a couple of other injuries, namely like remember Cam Akers tore his Achilles a few years back, and it seemed like he was back at it after like a 6-month recovery time. Do you think there's anything to the way that NFL players are maybe training or conditioning, or with the way modern medicine has advanced, that a lot of these potentially catastrophic and long-term recovery times really seem to be cut in half? Or are we just seeing some anecdotal situations here?
I mean, it could be anecdotal, but I think the other thing that's pretty wild is we have heard for the longest time that anything that is turf or artificial is a lot worse for wear and tear on injuries. Look back to the struggling days of the Lions, in the early seasons of Ford Field, and routinely they would lead the league in injuries. Not saying that like artificial is unsafe or anything, but a lot of times the teams that play on grass tend to be a little bit healthier. And this, of course, happened at home. It was right on the field turf there. Um, I think it is in part that they are doing full season workouts. There is an off season where just games aren't being played, but these players, especially the young players, it's so much easier for them to recover from these injuries. Even Aaron Rodgers, quite frankly, like what he suffered was, even at his age, was pretty remarkable. That had it happened a little, maybe in preseason or something like that, he actually could have, done something. So I think when the players are healthier, or excuse me, when they're younger, I think it does lead to a more of a bounce back situation. But quite honestly, these strength and conditioning, coaches that they're paying, they get a lot of money. They're cutting edge in terms of what they're able to do, and the NFL is going to hire the best of the best when it comes to that.
You're listening to this latest episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Vince Progar, Phil Byrne, along with you. Happy you could be starting off your week with us. We've been having a lot of fun with this so far, so we're going to keep the train rolling here. And this is why the NFL is such a great league, because there really is something to talk about at any point of the year, especially in the offseason when there's no actual games to be played. The start of the NFL free agency calendar got kicked off over this past weekend, and we were already starting to see a flurry of activity amongst some NFL teams. So we'll kind of get into some things a little bit here. Within the NFC, a couple of big stories to speak of were a team that the Lions knocked out of the playoffs, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who will also be on our schedule next season. We were able to get some things figured out with a couple of players they had some question marks on. They were able to reach a 3-year, $100 million deal with quarterback Baker Mayfield. They were also able to work out a extension with franchise receiver, probably the most prolific receiver in franchise history, in Mike Evans. And they're able to use the franchise tag on Antoine Winfield Jr., a big member of their defensive secondary. So pretty active couple of days for the Tampa Bay Bucks.
And here I thought we were going to start with Mac Jones getting traded to the Jaguars. I mean, come on, that's earth shattering, right? For a 6th-round pick, that happened too. But the Patriots will be looking for a new starting quarterback this year. But Bucks,
at least the Jaguars don't have to rely on C.J. Beathard to pinch hit for Trevor Lawrence the rest of the way now.
Quite honestly, I'd be more comfortable rolling Blake Bortles out there than Mac Jones at this point. But anyways,
choose your Missouri quarterback.
but anyways, I truly feel like the Bucks, these are moves that they wanted to get. Certainly Winfield and Mike Evans, part of the core that they've had for a number of years, obviously going back to the Super Bowl year with Tom Brady. And Baker played really, really well. He was a little hit or miss in the game against the Lions, and in some games, but I think he warranted to come back. Now he gets a 3-year, about $100 million deal. That's kind of where the quarterback market is at, and I think he's a player that felt comfortable in Tampa. I think Tampa felt comfortable with him. So they're gonna roll him back out for 3 more years, and he'll kind of hit his prime years. With Tampa, kind of hitting the age 30 and above now. So we're not sure how much Mike Evans has left in the tank. I was really, really hoping that he would hit the open market, and maybe the Lions could float a 1-year deal out there for him or something. But that's where he's been. He's going to be a Buck for life, it looks like, and I think they have a Ring of Honor or something like that. I'm sure he'll be inducted into it at one point in time here. That's big on them. And then Antoine Winfield, one of the top players, in defense in the whole league. He's a guy that I wish the Lions would have taken way back when, but we had Quintricia and we took Tease Tabor. And
but did you see his speed out there at the University of Florida, Phil?
I actually did not. He could cover well. Yeah. Because I saw him and Jared Davis back when they were at Florida, but it's actually kind of ironic. Actually, the entire Gators defense I saw, for the most part, I think there's a couple guys that are still around, but a lot of them ended up being kind of busts, that were taken rather highly. Vernon Hargraves, another one. But we're getting off track here. The
Yeah, I
Bucks,
was gonna say
they
I think I'd rather have I think I'd rather have Patrick Young from the Florida basketball team that year in my secondary before I would have taken Tease Tabor, but I
yeah,
digress.
yeah.
But I want to
But
tie this into Jared Goff though. So
yeah,
we've already saw that Tampa Bay made the move with Mayfield,
mm-hmm.
3 years, $100 million. So that basically, in a sense, forces the Lions' hand of what they're going to do with Jared Goff now that, okay, the first quarterback signing of the season has been made. You can
Mm-hmm.
argue that Goff probably holds a little bit more value
Yeah.
to the Lions franchise than Mayfield with Tampa Bay. So I think now we have actual numbers as a set precedent in place here that the Lions front office needs to be mindful of moving forward, and also something that the Jared Goff camp has in the back of their mind as a starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. The floor has been set for like what the bare minimum will be, and kind of you just got to go from there, right? And we'll see what happens with Kirk Cousins too, whether Minnesota ends up kind of bringing him back and kind of what his contract is going to look like and stuff like that. But yeah, so if Baker Mayfield's going, 100 million, on 3 years, it's roughly 33, 34 a year. I would venture that Jared Goff's camp is probably going to be asking minimum 40, 42, 45, a year, somewhere in that range, probably. And that's kind of where that's going to start. And it kind of goes back to the whole thing, like what is the Lions' first chess move going to be here this offseason with re-signing these guys? Is it Goff, St. Brown? Do they already try to reach out and get something with Penei Sewell? They've got some guys that they want to address. I think it's still Jared Goff, quite honestly. Like, love Sun God, Amon Ra, but there are 1.5 million receivers that are going to command top market, and the quarterback's a quarterback, and it sets, the market and everything from the financial standpoint. So they really do need to figure that one out. And I would still anticipate it to be the first move, but who knows? I've seen crazier things before. Maybe it wouldn't get done until after the draft, but yeah, the floor has been set with the market.
This will be one to keep our eye on for sure. I want to circle back to a move that you pointed out just a few minutes ago. Mac Jones, the one-time starting quarterback for the New England Patriots, just didn't work out. Traded to the Jacksonville Jaguars for a ham sandwich, so it looks pretty evident that the Patriots are going to fulfill their need for a quarterback with the number 3 overall pick in the NFL draft. Unless you are on the unless you're on the Bailey Zappi train, then
come on, Jimmy Garoppolo, make it full circle. No, I think you're onto it. I think they know that somewhere along there, those quarterbacks, there's going to be 2 of them that are going top 3, right? I at some point in time, I thought maybe Marvin Harrison Jr. would go somewhere in there, but it looks like it could be a 1, 2, 3 quarterback draft, and they'll probably be happy figuring out if it's going to be Jaden Daniels or Drake May, and kind of roll with that.
Couple of moves that impact the Lions. The Bears are keeping stud cornerback Jalen Johnson, and they went out and got free agent safety Kevin Byard to kind of fortify that secondary. That's more or less Bears head coach Matt Eberflus's secondary, or that's a specialty, is that secondary, and really bolstering what they're able to do. So that's a big move that affects the Lions. And it just seems like the Bears are positioning themselves to be a really sneaky, scary team for next season.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that hey, this is not a gambling podcast, but if you're looking at like Lions futures bets and stuff like that, the fact that the Bears and the Packers are going to have a lot of momentum on their side, in the offseason and getting a lot of hype before any of these games get played, that could favor into your factor if you like the Lions to, win the NFC this year and get to the Super Bowl and take that next step. That it's not like they got chump change in the division, So I mean, they're gonna have to earn this, and it's probably keeping San Francisco still is the top favorite, to win the NFC. Maybe even the Eagles in there, but it's something to keep an eye on. Yeah, the Bears keep stacking that defense. I already liked it, kind of where it was headed. And of course, they got all those picks to kind of play around with it a little bit more, even though I think most people believe those picks are going offense in the first round. But, we'll see.
A lot of guys staying put around the NFL. The Chiefs wrap up Chris Jones to a big time 5-year contract. So they were finally able to get some things worked out a year after a little bit of hostility in the offseason between the two parties. Tyler Lockett, receiver for the Seahawks, restructures a dealer to stay a Seahawk for a little bit longer. You've got Justin Matabuke, the big dog up at the front end of the defense for the Baltimore Ravens, was extended as well, 4 years, $98 million. It just seems like a lot of guys staying put this time around. One move of note, I suppose, would be the Broncos trading Jerry Jeudy, receiver, to the Cleveland Browns. Other than that, we didn't see a whole lot of movement from one team or another over the last few days.
No, but I'm sure it'll intensify, kind of once we get a little bit closer to the draft. And, I still think, it seems like by all accounts, the Bears are locked in, with what they want to do at the quarterback spot. So, we'll see if they end up dealing, Justin Fields at some point here. That's going to be a massive offseason story. But, there's still enough time that, I think kind of post combine, kind of when the official, workout days or pro days, I should say, at the college campuses start to happen is really when the wheeling and dealing as far as, draft picks getting traded and stuff like that ahead of the draft happens. So, we'll kind of start to see that.
So, what we have in front of us here is the Bears making tangible, noticeable efforts to get better. You've got the Packers making tangible, noticeable efforts to get better. And it just seems like the Lions are kind of taking a let's let it all play out approach. So Brad Holmes has proven through his track record as Lions general manager that he tends to favor the offense when it comes to those early picks in the draft. Okay, that's all fine and great. And you're seeing, as you pointed out a minute ago, Phil, you're seeing a lot of chitter chatter towards the Lions maybe using that pick at the bottom of the first round to start to restash that war chest on the Lions offensive line, which has been to say strength over the last few years has been an understatement in terms
Yeah.
of really getting the Lions into arguably a top 5 unit offensively.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is Brad Holmes going to use trades and free agency to build up that defense? Because it sounds like there's nobody they're really in love with in the draft on defense, at least in the early rounds, that they're going to use that high round draft capital on. So the question is, Phil, what route are the Lions going to take here to start to build up that defense? Because that's the one unit where there's more questions than answers still if they're going to try and keep up with what the Bears have done in the offseason and what the Packers have done in the offseason.
Well, I think it's one of those things that, I think they are going to target some vets, but they're going to be kind of mindful with how many, resources they actually throw at them. Right. So, one name that I have seen kind of rumored out there, just based on Dan Campbell's ties to New Orleans, Marshawn Lattimore, and is he what he was 4
Isn't
years
he like
ago?
45 years old though?
Yeah, he's getting older. Yeah.
Like we
But
want a
I
guy
think
that's going
I
to
think
help, not that we're writing Social Security checks out to. Come on now.
But I think his approach, honestly, is to plug in a couple vets to, start the season, to kind of get the majority of the time, and then you work in, these younger guys. We just talked on it, about Ife Melifonwu, right? So basically, you had Tracy Walker there to hold the fort down for Ife Melifonwu to finally get comfortable, finally take that step. And then eventually there was no turning back, and he just took the job from Tracy Walker. And I think that's almost kind of how Brad Holmes wants to do this. So, I'd love to get the cornerback out of Toledo, but I don't think at pick 29 that's going to happen. Like, I think he's going top 12 now, based on every report that I've seen. So, offensive line probably is a very likely, destination for that pick if they're staying at 29. So, is it the second and third round that they try to go find a corner, and get them a little bit of playing time, but maybe not want them to start right away. So I feel like it's fairly deep at that spot. And I'm not going to throw out a name or anything like that, but I think that's kind of how he's doing it. And again, I think it comes back to the fact that he knows what the Lions core is. And I'm not so sure that like there is that player out there that is going to add to that core unless it's some guy that's going to get developed. Like I'd love for, another defensive end to get added on there.
What about like a
Opposite
Daniil
Hutch,
Hunter
but
or something like that? Is there any traction with maybe bringing a Daniil Hunter into the mix?
well, to be honest, we touched on it before. The Vikings are a distant fourth, right? So eh, you got to believe it's a viable option at this point. I we'll see how this goes and what some of the beat writers throw out there for rumors and stuff as we kind of head into a little bit deeper heart of the offseason here. But yeah, it is a little frustrating to know that a move like that could that be what gets us over the top? It could, but
Or maybe even get a
you know,
Zadarius Smith in there, some guy that's
yeah,
going to be able to, maybe
yeah,
play on a couple levels, make a difference. So that way you can maybe step into the draft and get a guy at corner, maybe in the second round or third round, get a guy in the first round to maybe start to replenish that offensive line. I just don't think I'm hearing enough. And maybe I'm just not doing a good job at keeping my ear to the ground on this, but it just doesn't seem like there's a clear cut plan in place for how they're going to address those points of need, not like a wish list,
yeah.
points of need on that defense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are also a ton of vets that just got cut in the secondary too. So, I wouldn't be shocked to see the Lions end up with one of those guys. But yeah, no, I don't think they're trading like any future first or anything like that for, a vet that's over the age of like 27, to come in here, and eat up some cap space. I don't think that's just how Brad Holmes wants to do it.
But you do have to keep in mind, though, that if the Lions are going to be near the top of the mountain these next few years, any first round draft capital they may or may not decide to part ways with is essentially second round picks at that point. I don't think you can hold pick 29 with the same amount of value as pick number 10. You're not looking
No,
at apples to
yeah,
apples at that point.
yeah, that's fair. I mean, that is fair. And a lot of times, pick 29 ends up turning into pick 5 or 6 in the second round. Via a trade up that there's some guy that's falling that some team wants to. So I think that's kind of the underrated story, quite honestly, about having the draft in Detroit. There's probably a good chance that maybe the Lions aren't even picking in the first round if that scenario plays out. So, um, anyways, plenty of stuff to kind of uncover as we get a little closer to the draft.
So we're running out of time here, but we did talk about Justin Fields at pretty good length, his situation with the Chicago Bears. It seems like it's a foregone conclusion that it's going to be a matter of the Bears using Caleb Williams to be their next quarterback with the number one overall pick in the draft and figuring out what to do with Fields at that point. There doesn't seem to be any major talks at that point,
Mm-hmm.
but he's going to be a big name. Kirk Cousins is going to be a big name moving forward to keep an eye on. Is Minnesota gonna pay to keep him around because they saw what was behind curtain number 2 when they had experienced the likes of Nick Mullins and Lord knows who the other guy was who started at quarterback. His name escapes me. That game against Green Bay on Sunday Night Football, I can't even remember what his name was. And then you've also got Russell Wilson, outright cut and buried by the Denver Broncos.
That's right.
And it sounds like maybe Wilson has or more of a fast track to getting in line with another franchise than any of those other guys do. It sounds like maybe Russell Wilson of the Steelers. What are you kind of looking forward to as we move forward with this next week of free agency?
Do the Steelers just not want to have an offense that's fun to watch? Listen, what a stud defense to just put up that poop platter that they want to throw on offense. What are they doing? No, Russell Wilson's not going to win them anything. You could argue that the Broncos, some of the receivers, and like they probably had more elements to have an explosive offense than the Steelers did. So man,
Maybe Mr. Unlimited is just what the doctor ordered,
Mr. Unlimited is really. Hey, listen, he had a wonderful career. He had an awesome career in Seattle. It just kind of went off the rails the last couple of years. But if I'm the Steelers, I'm looking other avenues for that. Quite honestly, Kirk Cousins in Pittsburgh would be, kind of fun for that team to close it out. But yeah, I think there is a lot of moving parts. I think if the Bears part with Justin Fields, I kind of think that's going to start to get all the other pieces kind of moving in place as far as what they're doing. Obviously, Atlanta's another kind of big part there. Are they the team that ends up trading for Justin Fields, being that he is, the local kid from there? So I, it's going to be interesting to watch. There's a lot of teams. The Raiders, of course, another one. So stay tuned.
That's all we've got for you on this week's episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Glad you could be along for the ride with us. Be sure to tune in next time and continue to like and subscribe. We really appreciate all the love and support. For Phil Byrne, that guy, I'm Vince Progar saying good morning, go Lions, forward down the field, over and out.